again, intellectuals in society, there is a spontaneous demand from the larger society for the end products of engineering, medical, and scientific professions, but the demand for public intellectuals is largely manufactured by the public intellectuals themselves.
Yes.
Explain that. How do they manufacture demand for their own services?
Well, one thing is by making alarming predictions, offering solutions to our problems. And if they didn't do that, if Noam Chomsky had just kept on stating in linguistics, neither of us probably would have ever heard of Noam Chomsky. He would have been just as famous around the world among linguists, but nobody else would have heard of him.
What do you make of global warming?
I think it's a classic example of the need for crusades. Now, many people are shocked by these emails. I'm not at all shocked by them. I read the original UN study years ago, and I was just curious as to how they were going to deal with the question that the temperatures went up first, and then there was the increase in carbon dioxide.
Right.
Because you can't say that A causes B if B happened first. And so I read this, and I could see they were tiptoeing through the tulips in the way they phrased things and so forth. They couldn't confront that. And now we're finding out that they knew darn well they couldn't deal with all the evidence.
So it fits the pattern of a group of intellectuals, climate scientists, who have a very narrow competency, suddenly proclaiming that there's a crisis, scaring the rest of us, thereby creating a demand for their services, not as climate scientists alone, but as a kind of high priestly caste that can tell us all how to live and save the entire planet, and in the meantime generate billions of dollars worth of government programs to fund their research initiatives. And so it's a racket.
Yes.
All right.
But again, you have to take account of the ability of human beings to rationalize. I'm sure there are scientists out there who believe some or much of what they're saying, and there are other scientists who believe the opposite. But the ones who are pushing global warming are doing their damnedest to make sure that those who believe the opposite don't get heard in the public.
So shouldn't there be some large-ish body of climate scientists who say the data really does suggest that we're headed into trouble here, but precisely because my saying so as a climate scientist will look like special pleading, we as a community of scientists should be even more careful about being completely transparent, pushing the data out to the public. They should overcome the hurdle that it looks like self-pleading. Why isn't that taking place?
There's no payoff to that.
All right.
Imagine yourself as an assistant professor in some department where your senior colleagues who are going to vote on your pay, among other things, have millions of dollars in grants handed out to promote global warming, and you say just what you just now said. And they'll say this guy is incorrigible. Employment peaked at 9%. Over the next several months, the unemployment began to subside irregularly, down to 6.3% by June of 1930. So 8 months after the stock market crash, we have not yet hit double digits in unemployment. June 1930, when it's 6.3%, the government intervenes the first real intervention on a massive scale under Hoover, the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, which were designed to reduce unemployment by restricting imports in the United States so that more of these goods will be built in the United States by American workers. It sounds good. 1,000 economists from the leading universities around the country signed a public appeal to Congress and the President not to pass this bill, that it would not do what they said it would do. It would not reduce unemployment. It would, in fact, lead to retaliation that would make it harder for Americans to sell their goods in other countries. As often happens, no one paid the slightest attention. The bill was passed, and within 5 months after the bill was passed, we had double-digit unemployment for the first time. This is from a bill designed to lower unemployment. And when it hit, and this time it did not subside. It never fell below double digits for the entire remainder of the decade of the 30s, not even for a single month. Not all of it was the Smoot-Hawley tariff. When FDR came in 33, he then put in the National Industrial Recovery Act. He put in the Agricultural Adjustment Act. He put in the Wagner Act. He issued more presidential executive orders than all subsequent presidents throughout the remainder of the 20th century. So the government intervened on a massive scale, and yet the unemployment never came down below double digits for the entire decade.
So we get the stock market crash in 29. Herbert Hoover, as president, understands that something terrible has happened, but fundamentally the policies in place are those of Calvin Coolidge and every president before, small federal government, and we see signs that the market begins to correct itself.
Right.
The economy begins to recover, and then Herbert Hoover and Congress decide what to do to fix things.
Yes.
And they immediately make things worse, and Franklin Roosevelt comes in and keeps fixing it and keeps fixing it and keeps fixing it, and it stays bad, bad, bad.
Yes.
That's a fair assessment?
Yes.
Okay. So then we have to move on to the next question, which is, well, then what did end the Great Depression? If it wasn't the New Deal, it's over by the middle of the unemployment is down to close to zero by the middle of the war.
Yes.
So what happened?
The war.
The war happened.
But the question is, what about the war?
Well, yes, right. Go ahead.
Well, one of the things that the war did that most people seem not to notice is that it took 12 million men out of the civilian labor force and put them in uniform.
That'll help your unemployment figures.
It will,
right.
Yes. FDR actually put his finger on something that other people overlook, and he had a wonderful statement about how with the coming of the war, Dr. New Deal was replaced by Dr. Win the War. And what that meant is the war put an end to the New Deal. And and moreover, it went the other direction. Instead of creating all this uncertainty, which all this intervention does, quite aside from the merits of the particular interventions, it gave a tremendous certainty because it began the practice of cost-plus contracts for military equipment suppliers. And so if you signed a contract with the government for $1 million, you were guaranteed you'd get your $1 million back, plus whatever profit they allowed in the contract. So before, you see, because of all the anti-business rhetoric, once you start intervening, it's not just a question of the merit of the particular intervention. It's the fact that nobody knows when you're going to intervene again. And that's true now. That, this whole thing about, no one said that you could fire the head of General Motors, but
income stagnation. You quote disapprovingly this assertion in the Washington Post. The incomes of most American households have remained stubbornly flat over the past 3 decades. I say you quote that and then you go on to demolish that. Would you demolish it for us, please?
That statement, as it's made, has some semblance of validity. But the problem is you're talking about households rather than about flesh and blood human beings. One of the real fallacies that runs through a lot of talk about income is confusing statistical categories with actual flesh and blood people. Households are of different sizes. They vary over time. They vary from one group to another. They vary from one income level to another. So, for example, there are 39 million people in the bottom 20% of households and 64 million in the top 20%. So you're saying, yes, 24 million additional people do tend to have more money. The household thing is really a tip-off, I think. Whenever I see somebody quoting household income, he's trying to make things look bad.
It's as simple as that. All right.
Yes.
All right. There's a rule of life.
Yes. For example, over a period of about 30 years, the household income rose by only 6%. Over those same years, per capita income rose by 51%. Because the number of people per household was declining all the while. I see. And when you're comparing income brackets, the number of working people in the top 20% is some multiple of the number of working people in the bottom 20%.
I see. So this notion that society is a layer cake divided into quintiles it's even quintiles is just wrong.
You can do it by category, but that's not doing it by people.
Right. Okay. Executive pay. One of the most popular, I'm quoting you, one of the most popular and fallacious explanations of the very high salaries of corporate executives is greed. Now, why is that a fallacious explanation?
Because you could become the greediest person in the world, and it would not raise your income by one dime.
I've tried it, actually, and it hasn't raised my income. So the question, what's the correct analytical point of departure for examining executive pay, then?
The question is not why they accept this money, but why other people are offering it to them.
Right, all right.
And that's a matter of competition. Now, some people argue, see, that you have these various boards on the corporation who are very generous in handing out the stockholders' money to the executives, and that's why they get these high salaries.
Right.
Now, if you wanted to actually test that against anything, you would say, all right, there are some corporations which are not owned by thousands of stockholders, owned by 2 or 3 huge financial companies.
Which have highly paid analysts to
Yes.
monitor exactly what's going on.
Yes.
All right. All right.
Though that's where the corporate CEOs get the highest pay of all. These people are, they have billions of dollars of their own money at stake, and they're not going to be penny wise and pound foolish to try to get someone for the lowest price. If the guy is the guy who's going to protect their billions, they'll throw him $100 million and consider it's nothing.